There is a race happening right now that will determine which countries lead the world for the next 100 years. Not a race for territory, not a race for oil, not even a race for semiconductor supply chains, though all of those matter. This is a race for artificial intelligence. And the stakes could not be higher. The nations that build the infrastructure to train, run, and export AI will set the terms of global trade, scientific discovery, and economic power for generations. The nations that don't will find themselves dependent, importing intelligence from abroad the way developing economies once imported steel or pharmaceuticals. India is acutely aware of this reality. With 1.4 billion people, the world's largest youth population, and one of the fastest-growing digital economies on the planet, India has enormous potential in the AI age. But potential and capability are not the same thing. For years, Indian engineers and researchers who wanted to work with frontier AI had to send their data overseas, to servers in the United States or Europe, and pay hyperscalers like Amazon, Google, or Microsoft for the privilege. Every query, every training run, every model inference was costing India not just money, but sovereignty over its most valuable resource, its data. That framing, data as a strategic national asset, is precisely what made an event in October 2024 feel like a turning point. At the NVIDIA AI Summit in Mumbai, two of the most powerful figures in global technology stood on stage together and announced something that sounded almost too ambitious to be real. India would build its own AI supercomputing infrastructure at a scale that would rival anything in the world. Mukesh Ambani, the chairman of Reliance Industries and the richest man in Asia, and Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA and the architect of the modern AI hardware revolution, made a joint declaration that India was not going to sit this race out. This is the story of that partnership. It is a story about billions of dollars of infrastructure, about chips that are almost incomprehensibly powerful, about a new subsidiary born in September 2025 called Reliance Intelligence, and about what it means for 450 million Jio customers, for Indian startups and scientists, and for a country that has spent decades building the talent for an AI moment it is now, finally, trying to seize. The NVIDIA AI Summit ran for 3 days, October 23rd through the 25th, 2024, at the Jio World Convention Centre in Mumbai's Bandra Kurla complex. The venue itself was telling. The Jio World Convention Centre is a Reliance property, a gleaming glass and steel complex that sits as a monument to what private capital in India can build when it decides to. Hosting the AI Summit, there was not a neutral logistical decision. It was a signal about who owned this moment. The summit drew thousands of attendees, Indian government officials, startup founders, enterprise technology heads, researchers from IITs and IIMs, and a significant international contingent of AI investors and executives. NVIDIA had been running similar summits in other markets, Tokyo, Singapore, the Middle East, but the Mumbai edition felt different in scale and ambition. India is not just another emerging market for NVIDIA. It is a market that combines the size of the largest economies with the AI talent density of a top-tier tech nation. Over the 3 days, there were keynote addresses, technical workshops, developer sessions, and demos. Startups showed off what they were building with NVIDIA hardware. Academics presented research on Indic language models. Enterprise companies from banking to pharmaceuticals to logistics talked about where they were deploying AI internally. The energy in the room was the kind that attends a genuinely pivotal moment, not manufactured excitement, but the real thing. But the centerpiece of the entire summit was the announcement. The moment when Jensen Huang and Mukesh Ambani walked out together, and the shape of what India's AI future might look like started to become concrete. That moment didn't come out of nowhere. Months of negotiations and planning had preceded it, but it landed with the force of something new and irreversible. India was making a serious bet, with serious money, backed by the world's most important AI hardware company. Photographers captured the image of the two men together, one in his characteristic leather jacket, the other in his signature white kurta. Different aesthetics, same ambition. When Jensen Huang and Mukesh Ambani stood together at the summit, the announcement they made was specific enough to be credible and ambitious enough to be genuinely significant. This was not a memorandum of understanding, not a vague statement of intent. It was a detailed partnership with named hardware, named locations, named subsidiaries, and a directional commitment of capital in the range of $20 to $30 billion. Huang's central message was built around a single, powerful idea: data sovereignty. His now famous line, "India should not export data to import intelligence," was the philosophical spine of everything that followed. He argued that India's AI journey should not replicate the model that many countries had fallen into, where local data got processed by American hyperscalers, with the insights flowing back to the data center operator rather than to the country that generated the data. India, he said, should build its own intelligence infrastructure. It should train models on Indian data, in Indian languages, for Indian users, and ultimately export that AI-driven intelligence to the world. Ambani's framing was equally sharp. He tied the AI bet explicitly to the Jio precedent, the idea that Reliance had done this before, that it understood what it meant to make a risky, capital-intensive, infrastructure-first bet in service of democratizing access to a transformational technology. Just as Jio had made mobile data so cheap that a street vendor in Varanasi could watch YouTube, Reliance Intelligence would make AI so accessible that a student in Patna could query a frontier model in Bhojpuri. What was actually committed included NVIDIA providing end-to-end AI supercomputer technology, CPUs, GPUs, networking infrastructure, and the AI operating system and frameworks that stitch it all together. Reliance committed to building data centers at a scale that would make this among the largest AI infrastructure deployments anywhere in the world. The location, Jamnagar, in Gujarat, was chosen because of the extraordinary energy ecosystem Reliance has already built there. The message to the room, to India, and to the global technology industry was unambiguous. This was not a pilot program. This was a national-scale infrastructure commitment with two of the biggest names in global business standing behind it. 3 gigawatts. That number deserves a moment to land because it is extraordinary even by the standards of the current global AI infrastructure boom. To put it in context, a large traditional data center might consume 100 to 200 megawatts of power. The hyperscale facilities that companies like Google and Microsoft have been building over the past decade are considered massive at 500 megawatts to a gigawatt. What Reliance is planning in Jamnagar, a 3-gigawatt AI infrastructure complex, would place it among the largest concentrations of computing power ever assembled in one location, anywhere on Earth. The initial announcement in October 2024 framed the first phase as expanding to 2,000 megawatts, 2 gigawatts, but subsequent reporting and industry analysis pushed the longer-term target up to 3 gigawatts. The first concrete milestone is 120 megawatts operational by the end of 2026, delivered in phases as hardware arrives, is installed, and is integrated into the infrastructure stack. That first 120 MW is not trivial. It already represents a significant deployment, but it is the beginning of a much larger build-out that will unfold over several years. The choice of Jamnagar is strategically deliberate. Jamnagar, on the coast of Gujarat, is already home to one of the world's largest oil refinery complexes, Reliance's crown industrial jewel. But Reliance has been aggressively investing in green energy at Jamnagar as well. Solar farms, wind installations, and battery storage systems as part of its commitment to net zero by 2035. An AI data center is extraordinarily power-hungry. The servers run hot, the cooling systems are vast, and the electricity bill is one of the biggest cost items in any data center's finances. Building that data center adjacent to your own green energy generation dramatically reduces energy costs and provides energy security in a way that depending on the public grid cannot. The total estimated investment for the infrastructure plan runs between $20 billion and $30 billion over the full build-out period. This is private capital, Reliance's own balance sheet, potentially supplemented by external financing, not government grant money, though the government is providing a policy tailwind through the IndiaAI Mission. What Reliance is building in Jamnagar is not just a data center. It is an AI city. Announcements about AI hardware can sound like alphabet soup: H100, H200, GH200, GB300, DGX, NVLink, and it can be hard to track what any of it means. Let's slow down and explain what Reliance is actually deploying and why the specific chips matter. The first wave of hardware that Reliance procured for near-term AI services included 752 NVIDIA H200 GPUs. The H200 is an evolution of the H100, widely considered the workhorse of the current AI boom. These are the chips that power the inference behind products like ChatGPT and countless enterprise AI deployments. Think of H100s and H200s as the heavy-duty trucks of AI compute, reliable, proven, capable of handling serious workloads. Alongside the H200s, Reliance also procured 268 AMD MI300X GPUs, a sign that even in a world where NVIDIA dominates, large buyers diversify their supply chain to maintain negotiating leverage and resilience. But the headline hardware in the Jio-NVIDIA partnership is something in an entirely different league. NVIDIA's GH200 Grace Hopper superchip combines a GPU and a CPU on a single package, connected at extraordinary bandwidth. It's the kind of chip you use not just for running AI applications, but for training the frontier models that power those applications. And then there's the GB300, NVIDIA's latest generation Blackwell Ultra architecture chip, the cutting edge of what silicon can do today. To give you a sense of the scale leap, NVIDIA claims the GB300 delivers computing power equivalent to approximately 75,000 H100 GPUs. Think about that for a moment. If you tried to replicate the power of a GB300-based deployment using the H100s that dominated the market just 2 years ago, you would need a warehouse stuffed floor-to-ceiling with rack after rack of servers, and a power grid to match. The GB300 does it in a fraction of the space and power. This is not iterative improvement. It is a generational jump in what AI hardware can accomplish. Reliance has also deployed NVIDIA DGX Cloud as an early-phase service. NVIDIA's managed cloud offering that gives enterprise customers and researchers access to NVIDIA GPU clusters without managing the underlying hardware themselves. The full partnership envisions NVIDIA providing not just chips but the entire stack: CPUs, GPUs, high-speed InfiniBand networking, the NVIDIA AI Enterprise Operating System, and the software frameworks that let developers build on top of it. When Reliance says this facility will be more than an order of magnitude more powerful than the fastest supercomputer in India today, they are not exaggerating. The gap in scale is genuinely that large. In September 2025, Reliance quietly incorporated a new wholly owned subsidiary, Reliance Intelligence. The name is almost poetically blunt. This is not a cloud division or a technology arm buried inside a larger business unit. It is a standalone entity with a standalone name, and the name tells you everything about what Reliance intends to build. Akash Ambani, presenting at Reliance Industries' 49th annual general meeting, offered the clearest articulation of what Reliance Intelligence is meant to become. He said, "What Jio did for data, Reliance Intelligence will do for AI." That is a bold claim, but it is a coherent one. Jio took something that was expensive, scarce, and inaccessible to most Indians, mobile data, and made it abundant, cheap, and universal. The explicit ambition of Reliance Intelligence is to do the same thing for AI capability. To take something that currently requires access to expensive foreign cloud services and frontier models built for English-speaking markets, and make it available to any Indian who needs it in their language, at a price point they can afford. The 4 strategic pillars of Reliance Intelligence are AI-ready data centers, meaning the infrastructure being built in Jamnagar; global partnerships, meaning the NVIDIA deal, the Google Cloud relationship, the Microsoft Azure integration; AI services, meaning the products and APIs that businesses and developers will actually use; and AI talent, meaning hiring and developing the researchers, engineers, and data scientists who will build the models and applications that run on this infrastructure. What's significant about incorporating Reliance Intelligence as a separate subsidiary, rather than folding it into Jio Platforms or Reliance Retail, is that it signals an intention to treat AI as a distinct business vertical that will eventually need its own capital structure, its own governance, and potentially its own public market valuation. The Jio IPO precedent is instructive. Jio Platforms was also kept separate, and that structure ultimately allowed Reliance to raise tens of billions of dollars from marquee global investors including Google, Facebook, KKR, and Silver Lake. Reliance Intelligence may be being set up for a similar journey. For all the talk of gigawatts and superchips, the practical question that matters to most technology professionals in India is much simpler. What can I actually build with this, and what will it cost me? JioCloud is Reliance's answer. It is the developer-facing platform that sits on top of the infrastructure being built in Jamnagar, the layer that translates raw computing power into APIs, tools, and services that startups, enterprises, and researchers can actually use. The vision for JioCloud is to become India's native AI cloud, a domestic alternative to AWS, Google Cloud, and Azure that understands Indian data sovereignty concerns, prices in rupees, operates under Indian data localization laws, and is tuned for Indian use cases and Indian language requirements. For a startup building an AI-powered product, the pitch is straightforward. Instead of routing your requests through data centers in Virginia or Oregon, you can access frontier model inference from a Jamnagar facility. Your data doesn't leave India. Your latency is lower because the servers are geographically closer. And because Reliance controls the underlying infrastructure, there is at least the potential for pricing that is designed to be competitive rather than extractive. In the same way, Jio's data pricing was designed to undercut the incumbents so aggressively that the market had to reshape itself. For researchers and scientists, JioCloud represents something different: access to computing scale that was simply not available in India before. Running a large language model training run, doing protein folding simulations, modeling climate scenarios. These are computationally intensive tasks that previously required either access to a global hyperscaler cloud, account with an enormous budget, or a relationship with one of the very few Indian academic institutions with serious GPU clusters. The IndiaAI Mission has been trying to address this gap at the government level, but JioCloud represents a private sector complement. High-end computing resources accessible to anyone with a valid use case and the budget to pay for them. JioCloud also has integrations with Microsoft Azure, meaning developers already building on the Microsoft ecosystem can access Reliance's infrastructure through familiar interfaces. That interoperability is important. It lowers the switching cost for enterprises that might otherwise see the choice between a domestic cloud and a global hyperscaler as a binary, either-or decision rather than a both-and one. Strip away all the hardware specifications and the geopolitical framing and the corporate strategy, and what you're left with is a very human question. What does this actually mean for the person holding a Jio SIM in their pocket? What does 3 gigawatts of AI compute in Jamnagar change for the farmer in Maharashtra, the student in Assam, the auto-rickshaw driver in Chennai? The answer, if the plan works as intended, is quite a lot. Jio has over 450 million subscribers, a number that is almost incomprehensibly large. It is more than the entire population of the United States and Canada combined. These are people who are already connected to the internet through Jio's 4G and 5G networks, already using apps on smartphones that Jio's ecosystem helped make affordable. The AI layer in Reliance's vision sits on top of all of that existing connectivity. Think about what an AI assistant that genuinely understood Hindustani, or Marathi, or Tamil, or Odia could do for people in those language communities. Most frontier AI models today are built primarily on English language training data. They are fluent in English and can answer questions in other major languages, but they do not have the cultural depth, the idiomatic fluency, the localized knowledge that would make them genuinely useful to someone who thinks, works, and communicates primarily in their mother tongue. Building AI infrastructure that trains on Indian language data, Jio generates enormous amounts of it, creates the possibility of models that are genuinely first-class in Indic languages, not translated or approximated from English. The consumer applications are wide-ranging. An AI assistant on my Jio that helps a first-generation internet user navigate government services in their local language. AI-powered healthcare tools that help someone in a rural area describe symptoms and get a preliminary assessment before they have seen a doctor. AI tutoring for students who cannot afford private coaching. Smart search in JioMart that understands vernacular queries. Customer service that works in whatever language the caller speaks. The ambition, in Akash Ambani's words, is to democratize AI, to make intelligence affordable and accessible for farmers, students, creators, and entrepreneurs across India the same way a phone call became cheap for every Indian in the Durabhai era, and the same way mobile data became cheap for every Indian in the Jio era. The Jio NVIDIA partnership is the headline, but it does not exist in isolation. The broader picture of AI infrastructure investment in India involves a web of partnerships between global technology giants and Indian conglomerates, and understanding that web is important for grasping the full competitive landscape. Reliance has a separate partnership with Google Cloud that is architecturally significant. Google is building a dedicated cloud region in Jamnagar, not just a point of presence, but a full cloud region powered by clean energy from Reliance's green energy infrastructure. This Google Cloud region will run alongside the NVIDIA-powered AI compute infrastructure, giving Reliance's clients access to Google's managed services, its AI tools, and its global infrastructure network, all from Indian soil and powered by renewable energy. The combination of NVIDIA compute for training and inference with Google Cloud for managed services and developer tooling creates a very powerful stack. It also demonstrates that Reliance has been smart about partnering broadly, not putting all its technology eggs in one basket. Microsoft Azure has its own integration with JioCloud, providing another layer of compatibility for enterprise customers who are already standardized on the Microsoft ecosystem. This matters for large Indian companies, banks, manufacturers, consumer goods companies that have years of Microsoft infrastructure investment and are not going to abandon that overnight. Being able to access Reliance's domestic AI infrastructure through Azure-compatible interfaces dramatically lowers the barrier to adoption. Meanwhile, NVIDIA has not limited its India partnerships to Reliance. NVIDIA is also working with the Tata Group on AI cloud infrastructure, a separate initiative that reflects how broadly NVIDIA is trying to plant its technology across the Indian market. Tata has its own conglomerate muscle, its own enterprise relationships, and its own history of technology services through TCS. The Tata-NVIDIA partnership competes with Jio's offering for enterprise customers, which is ultimately healthy for the Indian AI ecosystem, even if it creates competitive tension between two of India's most powerful business groups. More competition means better pricing and better service for Indian enterprises trying to figure out their AI strategy. Private capital is only part of the story. The Indian government has its own ambitious program running in parallel, and understanding how public and private investment interact is important for grasping the full picture of India's AI moment. The IndiaAI Mission was announced in March 2024 with a budget of 10,000 crore rupees, roughly $1.2 billion, allocated over 5 years. The mission has several components, but the most tangible is the Public Compute Initiative. The government is procuring GPU clusters and making them available to Indian researchers, startups, and academic institutions at subsidized rates. The goal is to ensure that access to AI compute is not limited to companies that can afford hyperscaler pricing or that have the relationships to access private infrastructure like JioCloud. The first 2 bidding rounds under IndiaAI Mission resulted in the installation of over 17,000 GPUs across multiple facilities as of June 2025. These are not frontier-level supercomputing resources in the way the Jamnagar deployment will be, but they are significant, and they are specifically targeted at the research and startup communities that might not yet have access to commercial cloud infrastructure. Organizations working on Indic language models, on agricultural AI, on healthcare diagnostics, on climate modeling. These are the primary beneficiaries of publicly subsidized compute. The government's role goes beyond just writing checks for hardware. The IndiaAI Mission also includes programs for AI safety research, for developing AI governance frameworks, for building AI talent through scholarships and upskilling initiatives, and for promoting Indian AI startups in international markets. There is a deliberate attempt to ensure that India's AI capability development is not purely dependent on private sector decisions, that there is a public interest layer that focuses on applications with social value, even when they are not immediately commercially attractive. The relationship between the IndiaAI Mission and the NVIDIA private infrastructure is complementary rather than competitive. The government is building a floor of accessible compute for public interest use. Reliance is building a ceiling of frontier compute for commercial and enterprise use. The ambition is for the two to interact, for startups that develop initial prototypes on publicly funded compute to eventually scale their services on commercial infrastructure like JioCloud, creating a pipeline from government-supported research to market-ready AI products. India is not one language, it is not even 10. The Indian constitution recognizes 22 scheduled languages, but linguists count hundreds of distinct languages and thousands of dialects spoken across the country. Hindi is the most widely spoken, but it is not a majority language. Roughly 44% of Indians list it as their first language, meaning a majority do not. Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, Malayalam, Marathi, Bengali, Gujarati, Punjabi. Odia, each of these is a language with tens of millions of speakers, rich literary traditions, and grammatical structures that bear no resemblance to one another or to English. Most frontier AI models have been trained overwhelmingly on English text scraped from the internet, with secondary coverage of Chinese, Spanish, French, and German. The coverage of Indic languages in these models is thin, inconsistent, and often poor. Ask a frontier English language model to compose a letter in Odia, or to understand the cultural nuances of a Tamil proverb, and you will quickly discover the limits of translation-based approaches. These models are not reasoning in Indic languages. They are mapping concepts from English into target languages, and the result is often stilted, culturally tone-deaf, or simply wrong. Building AI infrastructure on Indian soil, training on Indian data, with Indian language corpora as a priority. This is the technical foundation required to change that. Jio generates an enormous amount of data in Indic languages, voice transcriptions, regional news and entertainment queries, customer service interactions, social media conversations. This data, combined with Indian academic and literary corpora, could form the training foundation for genuinely world-class Indic language AI models. The implications extend far beyond consumer chatbots. Court proceedings in India happen in dozens of regional languages, and AI that can understand and summarize legal documents in those languages could dramatically improve access to justice for people who cannot afford lawyers. Medical consultations, government services, agricultural advice, financial guidance, all of these become accessible to vastly more people when the AI can meet them in their own language, rather than requiring them to code switch into English or simplified Hindi. India has more second-language English speakers than almost any country on Earth, but the people who most need AI tools, rural farmers, small business owners, first-generation literate communities, are the people least likely to be comfortable navigating AI in a foreign language. Indic language AI is the difference between AI that serves 20% of India and AI that serves all of it. To understand why the Jio-NVIDIA partnership matters, you first have to understand what Jio did in 2016. Before Jio launched its commercial 4G services in September of that year, mobile data in India was among the most expensive in the world, roughly 250 rupees per gigabyte, at a time when most Indians earned a few hundred rupees a day. The internet was something for the urban middle class, for people who could afford a decent smartphone and a post-paid plan. The farmer in Gujarat, the student in a Bihar village, the small shop owner in a Tamil Nadu town, they were largely locked out. What Jio did was borderline unprecedented in the history of telecoms. It launched with free data, completely free. For months, anyone with a Jio SIM could browse, stream, and download without paying a rupee for data. It was a strategy that only made sense from a company with Reliance's balance sheet, the kind of short-term pain that would be suicidal for a normal operator, but that a conglomerate backed by refinery revenues and retail profits could absorb. The bet was that if you could get hundreds of millions of Indians online cheaply enough, you would create an ecosystem that justified the investment many times over. The bet paid off beyond even optimistic projections. Jio didn't just enter the telecom market, it detonated it. Data prices across India collapsed within months. Competitors like Airtel, Vodafone, and Idea were forced to slash their own rates to survive. Idea and Vodafone eventually merged just to stay solvent. By the time the dust settled, India had gone from one of the world's most expensive data markets to one of the cheapest, and internet penetration had climbed from around 35% to well over 60% in just a few years. Today Jio has more than 450 million subscribers. It is not just a telecom network, it is an ecosystem. Jio TV, Jio Savan, Jio Mart, Jio Fiber, the My Jio Super app. Reliance has spent the years since 2016 layering services on top of the connectivity it owns. The strategic logic is the same logic that powers Amazon Prime or Apple's ecosystem. Own the pipe, then fill it with your own content and services. Now Reliance is asking a new version of the same question it asked in 2016. What if we did this again, but for artificial intelligence? Mukesh Ambani is not a man who thinks in quarters. He thinks in decades. Born in 1957, the eldest son of Dhirubhai Ambani, the founder of Reliance Industries, whose own story reads like a Bollywood script. Mukesh has spent his career building on a foundation his father created, but in directions his father could never have imagined. Under his leadership, Reliance has transformed from a petrochemicals and textiles conglomerate into something far more complex. An energy to retail to telecom to media behemoth with tentacles in nearly every sector of the Indian economy. The Jio move in 2016 was deeply personal to Ambani. He had watched his father democratize access to telephony in the 1990s. Dhirubhai famously said that one day making a phone call would be cheaper than a postcard. Mukesh wanted to do the same for the internet, and he did. But the AI move feels different in character. It is not just about disruption for its own sake, or even about market share. There is something that reads like genuine conviction. A belief that AI is as transformative as electricity was a century ago, and that for India to be a serious civilization in the 21st century, it cannot be dependent on foreign intelligence infrastructure. Ambani is in his late 60s and has spent the last few years steadily transferring leadership responsibilities to his children. His son Akash, now in his early 30s, leads Jio Platforms. His daughter Isha leads Reliance Retail. His younger son Anant has taken on the new energy business. But the AI bet, the Jio-NVIDIA partnership, the Reliance Intelligence subsidiary, the Jamnagar data center, appears to have the chairman's personal imprint. When Akash Ambani stood at Reliance's 49th annual general meeting and said what Jio did for data, Reliance Intelligence will do for AI, he was articulating a vision that clearly came from the top of the family. Ambani's wealth gives him a freedom that most business leaders do not have, the ability to absorb years of losses in pursuit of a decade-long vision. The Jio bet cost Reliance billions before it turned profitable. The AI bet will likely cost more. But if it works, if Reliance Intelligence becomes the dominant AI platform across South Asia and beyond, the returns could dwarf anything the telecom play generated. To understand why NVIDIA is the company at the center of this story, you have to go back to what a graphics processing unit actually does and why, almost by accident, it turned out to be the perfect tool for training artificial intelligence. NVIDIA was founded in 1993 by Jensen Huang, Chris Malachowski, and Curtis Preem. For most of its early existence, it was a gaming hardware company. Its GPUs were what let video games render realistic 3D environments, mountains, explosions, reflections on water, at high frame rates. The way a GPU achieves this is by doing an enormous number of relatively simple calculations in parallel. A single frame in a video game might require millions of calculations happening simultaneously. So NVIDIA built chips that had not one or two processing cores, like a traditional CPU, but hundreds and eventually thousands of them, all working in parallel. For years this was a niche of the technology industry, important for gamers, useful for certain scientific simulations, but not particularly central to enterprise computing or the broader economy. Then, in the early 2010s, a few researchers started noticing something. The kind of mathematics that runs a neural network, multiplying enormous matrices of numbers together, over and over again, during the training process, looked an awful lot like the kind of mathematics a GPU did when rendering a game. The parallel architecture that made GPUs good at graphics made them extraordinarily fast at training AI models. This insight changed NVIDIA's trajectory entirely. As the deep learning revolution gathered pace through the 2010s, and as companies like Google, Facebook, and OpenAI started training models of ever-increasing scale, demand for NVIDIA GPUs exploded. The H100 chip, released in 2022 and priced at roughly $30,000 each, became the most sought-after piece of silicon in the world. Data centers, cloud providers, and AI labs competed ferociously for supply. NVIDIA's market capitalization soared dramatically, one of the fastest wealth creations in corporate history. The company that once made gaming cards was now the backbone of the global AI economy. Jensen Huang was born in Taiwan in 1963, moved to the United States as a teenager, and earned his electrical engineering degrees before co-founding NVIDIA in his early 30s. He has led the company as CEO for its entire existence, an almost unparalleled run in the modern technology industry. And throughout that run, he has combined an engineer's grasp of silicon with a strategist's instinct for where the world is heading. Huang bet on GPU computing for AI years before most of the industry was convinced the bet would pay off. NVIDIA invested heavily in CUDA, its parallel computing platform, in the mid-2000s, not because there was obvious demand from AI researchers at the time, but because Huang could see that the mathematical architecture of neural networks was ideally matched to parallel processing. He was essentially building a road before there were cars to drive on it. When the deep learning revolution arrived, NVIDIA already owned the highway. But what makes Huang particularly compelling as a figure in this story is not just his technical foresight. It is his political and cultural instinct. When he appeared in Mumbai at the NVIDIA AI Summit in October 2024, he didn't deliver a standard tech executive speech full of benchmarks and market opportunity slides. He told India a story about itself. He talked about data sovereignty. He said, plainly and memorably, that India should not export data to import intelligence. That a country of 1.4 billion people, generating data in Hindi and Tamil and Telugu and Bengali and dozens of other languages, should not be sending that data to servers abroad and paying foreign companies to make sense of it. That line, export AI, not data, resonated deeply because it named something Indians already felt but hadn't heard articulated so crisply by a foreign tech CEO. Huang has an unusual ability to make technical infrastructure sound like a matter of national dignity. And in this case, he wasn't wrong. It genuinely is. The visit to Mumbai was not just a sales trip. It was a moment where the world's most important AI hardware company declared, with full conviction, that India was a priority market, not a growth afterthought, but a genuine strategic partner in the global AI story. It would be dishonest to tell this story without pausing on the challenges, because they are real and they are substantial. Building the world's largest AI infrastructure complex in Jamnagar is an extraordinarily ambitious undertaking, and ambition and execution are not the same thing. The first challenge is simply physical. Power and cooling at this scale is genuinely hard. A 3-gigawatt data center requires not just the electricity, which Reliance's green energy investments are meant to provide, but also enormous volumes of water for cooling, redundant transmission infrastructure, and supply chain logistics for hardware that is still scarce globally. NVIDIA is the dominant AI chip maker, but it is not operating with unlimited supply. GB300 chips are among the most complex manufacturing achievements in human history, produced almost exclusively by TSMC in Taiwan. Every major cloud provider and AI company in the world is competing for allocation. Reliance will have to navigate those supply constraints, and delays in hardware delivery could push the build-out timeline significantly. Second challenge is talent. India has an enormous pool of software engineers, but frontier AI research requires a more specific skill set, people who can train large models from scratch, design novel architectures, build the infrastructure tooling that makes distributed training work at massive scale, and evaluate model performance in ways that matter for real-world use cases. Many of India's best AI researchers work at Google, Meta, OpenAI and DeepMind in the United States. Attracting them back or developing comparable talent domestically will require compensation structures and research environments that are genuinely competitive with Silicon Valley, which is a very high bar. The third challenge is competition. Google, AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Oracle Cloud are all expanding their Indian infrastructure. These companies have decades of cloud experience, massive existing customer bases, and global ecosystems that Indian enterprises already depend on. Convincing those enterprises to shift even a portion of their AI workloads to a domestic provider, one that is newer, less proven, and still building its track record, is a sales and trust challenge as much as a technical one. And the rise of Chinese AI cloud providers in markets where geopolitical considerations might make them attractive creates additional complexity in Southeast Asia and Africa, markets where Reliance Intelligence might want to expand. None of these challenges are insurmountable. Reliance has overcome formidable obstacles before. The Jio rollout faced its own supply chain problems, regulatory battles, and competitive attacks. But eyes open is the right posture. This is a bet, not a certainty. The gap between announcing something extraordinary and delivering it is where most infrastructure projects go wrong. The immediate landmark is the end of 2026. By then, the first 120 megawatts of the Jamnagar complex is expected to be operational. The first phase of what will eventually be a 3-gigawatt facility. That 120 MW will represent real, usable AI compute. Researchers will be running experiments on it, startups will be building products, Jio's own AI services will be running on top of it. It is small relative to the eventual target, but it is concrete and near-term, and hitting it on schedule will be an important signal of execution credibility. The year 2026 may also bring the long-anticipated Jio IPO. Jio Platforms, the parent of Jio's telecom and digital services businesses, has been a candidate for public listing for years, with valuation estimates around $120 billion. A listing at that scale would be one of the largest IPOs in Indian history. If Reliance Intelligence is eventually associated with the Jio listing, the AI infrastructure narrative could become a central part of the IPO story, and the public market would have to put a value on what a partially built 3-gigawatt AI data center complex is worth. That is a question that does not have an obvious comparable, which means the valuation conversation will be genuinely interesting to watch. Beyond 2026, the trajectory depends heavily on how quickly the AI landscape evolves. If foundation model capabilities continue to improve at their current pace, the applications that can be built on top of Jamnagar's infrastructure will expand dramatically. Healthcare, agriculture, education, logistics, financial services, government administration. These sectors are all ripe for AI-driven transformation in India, and the organizations building those applications will need domestic compute infrastructure to do it at scale. There is also the export dimension. Jensen Huang's framing, export AI, not data, implies that India should not just build AI for domestic consumption, but should become a source of AI products and services for other markets. South Asia, Southeast Asia, Africa, the Middle East, there are enormous markets that share India's language diversity challenges, its data sovereignty concerns, and its need for AI that is affordable and culturally appropriate. A world-class Indian AI infrastructure could serve as the foundation for an Indian AI export economy, the way Indian software services companies like Infosys and TCS built a global export economy in the decades that followed liberalization. History does not always give a country a second chance at a defining technological transition. The first industrial revolution largely bypassed India while it was under colonial rule. The post-war electronics boom happened elsewhere. Even the early personal computing revolution of the 1980s and 1990s was something India participated in primarily as a supplier of services, talented engineers writing code for American and European companies, rather than as the originator of the platforms and products that shaped the world. The Internet era was different. Jio's entry in 2016 was an inflection point. India went from being a laggard to being one of the world's most sophisticated mobile internet markets in the space of a few years. The sheer scale of Indian digital engagement, the number of active UPI transactions, the daily video consumption, the explosion of homegrown apps and digital commerce, is a product of that infrastructure investment. Jio democratized access, and a generation of Indian entrepreneurs, developers, and creators built on top of it. The AI partnership between Jio and NVIDIA is a bet that the same pattern can repeat, at a higher level of ambition and complexity. The infrastructure goes in first, the gigawatts, the superchips, the data center halls in Jamnagar, the green energy grid that powers them. Then the platform layer follows, JioCloud, Reliance Intelligence, the APIs and tools that developers can build on. Then the applications, the Indic language models, the AI health assistants, the smart agricultural advisors, the vernacular AI that meets people where they actually are. And finally, the export, Indian AI products and services flowing outward to the world. Jensen Huang said India should not export data to import intelligence. That is a challenge framed as an aspiration. Whether Reliance has the execution capability, the talent pipeline, the supply chain resilience, and the patience to see this through over the next decade remains genuinely open. But the investment is real. The hardware is arriving. The subsidiary is incorporated. The summit has been held and the handshake has been made. For 1.4 billion people, farmers who need agricultural advice in Bhojpuri, students who need tutoring in Telugu, doctors in rural clinics who need diagnostic support in Kannada, entrepreneurs who need tools that understand their context and their language, the stakes of this bet are not abstract. They are as concrete as a mobile phone signal in a village that didn't have one before 2016. India's AI moment is not coming. It has begun.